Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Romance Track at ConTinual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Brice, and tonight we're going to be talking about ghosts, psychics, and curses, putting the paranormal in PNR. And I've got a host of great authors with me tonight to talk about that. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and say a little bit about what they write. So, Jordan, why don't you take it from there?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me to do this. This is really exciting because a lot of the conventions I do involve so much travel, and it's very exciting to do it right from my own dining room. My name is Jordan Castillo Price. I write male paranormal with a romantic subplot, and my main series is known as Psychop, and I've been writing that since 2006. So lots of psychics and lots of ghosts.
Awesome. AJ?
So I'm AJ Sherwood. I write basically a little bit of every genre. What most people know me for is my John's Mysteries. And that's more of a mystery series that's got some psychic power that's involved. But I've been published as an MM author since 2019, into 2019. But I've been writing fantasy since 2011. So I've kind of been in the game for a while.
Okay, and Pandora?
Hi, everybody. Gail, thank you so much for having me. My name is Pandora Pine, and I started out writing contemporary after quite a while in fan fiction. I used to write a lot of Kirk and McCoy fanfic back in the day. But now I'm doing the Cold Case Psychic series, which is somehow morphed into 34 books. We've got psychics and ghosts and, you know, one little vampire and a gargoyle or two and lots of witches. So it's been a lot of fun.
And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Brice. As Gail, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, steampunk, and more. And as Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. And all of my contemporary stuff, as Gail and Morgan, all overlap. So it's one big universe where everybody knows each other and comes and helps each other out. But lots of supernatural creatures and magic and curses and psychics and all that. So one of the things that really got me thinking about this panel is that we all write psychics, but they're all really different psychics. I love reading all your stuff, and I just always get a kick out of the fact that we do it so differently. So let's talk a little bit about how we came up with, well, back up before how we came up with the characters. What attracted you to writing about someone with psychic abilities? Pandora?
You know, I think there's something in all of us that we wish we had those kind of abilities, you know, to be able to speak with a loved one who was no longer with us, to cast spells, you know, to make magic a reality. And I think that's where it came from with me. I had an experience where I had been sea glassing on a beach and found 54 hearts in like a half an hour, and I knew that couldn't be any kind of a coincidence. So I actually saw a psychic about it, and she's like, oh yeah, your spirit guides are trying to tell you you need to write a series with recurring characters and one of them psychic. And I had never even given that a thought ever. And then 3 days later, Tennyson Grimm introduced himself to me, and I'm like, okay, here we go. Where I'm meant to be.
How about you, AJ?
You know, in my case, it was a little bit odd to write any kind of a paranormal mystery because I'd written high fantasy for so long. And I branched out in beginning of 2019, I want to say, into steampunk, which was kind of a new thing for me. And I had a dream one night. I'm sure we can all relate to this. And I dreamed John, basically is what I dreamed. And I dreamed that I had a psychic working as a detective in an agency. But when I woke up, my rational mind kind of kicked in and went, no, was he a wizard? Was he a psychic? What are we doing here? So I had to kind of figure out from there how his power worked. And I made the conscious decision to not make it magical, to make it psychic, because I'd not played in that sandbox before. And I felt like that would be a better take on what I was trying to do.
How about you, Jordan?
Well, it was interesting hearing both of your stories. It reminded me of something I hadn't thought of for a while, but when I was in college, I lived above a landlady who uh, said she was psychic and would often talk about things like, oh, this thing has this kind of vibration, or, oh, I felt I should do that. And she was dating an astrologer who taught me a lot about astrology. So these types of things were like really kind of normal and everyday stuff that we would talk about. Um, and since then, since I moved out of there, I hadn't really thought about it very much. I feel that my work is sort of influenced by TV. And I was thinking about the series Dead Zone, where the main character is a psychic, but it's everyone thinks that it would be an advantage to be a psychic, but for him it was more of a curse than a blessing, and it ended up destroying his life. So I think that's kind of the germ or the seed where psychop came from, is the thought that something that everyone would think would be an advantage would turn out to just be more of a burden.
I think for me, I've done 4 series of epic fantasy, and that's got the big, Gandalf kind of magic and the throwing lightning bolts around and big time magic. And when I did Deadly Curiosities, which was the first urban fantasy series that I ever did, it came about because I had done a short story for a collection of set in the modern day, and the editor came back and said, yeah, the stories we want for this, we want real magic. And my world is weird enough that I knew what he meant, not the lightning from the fingertips magic. They wanted something more toned down, like psychics and mediums, and something that wasn't Gandalf style. And it all kind of went from there. And so I think for me, doing the psychics in the Badlands and Treasure Trail series, it's toning that down even more and saying, if you don't have, AJ must be having a wonky connection. I know we had thunderstorms last night, and I was afraid I was going to get kicked off what I was taping last night. For me, it's kind of saying, okay, you only have this one skill. You can't change people into frogs or, call lightning from the sky. You can do this now, or deal with it. And so it was kind of a fun challenge like that. I want to come back to something Jordan said, which was the whole benefit or curse side, because that really comes through so much in your series, where he really struggles with his gift, and it hasn't always been a good thing for him. It's really caused him a lot of hardship.
Definitely. And I think that as the series progresses, he's inching closer and closer to being more self-actualized. But just early on in his career, he started as kind of a lab rat and was told by a deceased psychic, don't ever show people what you can do. And so he's taken that straight to heart. He lies like a rug, he minimizes, and I think he doesn't even understand the full extent of his ability yet, though he's starting to hit his ceiling. And that's great, because he spent 11 books trying to power up that when he's hitting a ceiling, now that's frustrating too. So anything you can do to frustrate your main character will yield more books for you.
Oh, we do enjoy torturing them, don't we? And Pandora, Tennyson's not, at the beginning, he's kind of private about what he can do in some ways too. He doesn't share real easily with other people, even though he's got some fame for what he's done.
Right. When we meet him at the beginning of Dead Speak, he's just helped locate a missing child. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have this broken down cop who had an incident where he'd been shot on the job, and he was an alcoholic. So there wasn't a whole lot of trust on either side. And then you throw in the fact that Ronan never thought Tennyson's abilities were real. And I think anytime someone doesn't believe in you, you tend to compartmentalize and internalize any gift you have, even, just something secular like being able to sing. So it took a little bit of time for the two of them to figure out that they could work together, and then of course for the fireworks to start.
AJ, John seems pretty comfortable in some ways with his power at the beginning of yours, but maybe not fully. He's still definitely working through some trust issues. What do you think? Could you hear me? You blinked that in and out. Okay. Gotta love technology. Well, let me jump in while she's getting squared away. I know with Simon in the Badlands series, he had really downplayed his actual psychic mediumship abilities. He was a PhD in folklore and mythology. He was teaching at a university. And even so, he got in trouble because he was in the Bible Belt and somebody's father reported him for, converting kids to Satanism, and he, lost his job. So he's real wary. So we're talking about trust issues and being comfortable with the gifts. Where's John on that?
Oh, well, that took him 3 books. What can I say? Yeah, because he sees so much, he really has issues with relationships because he can tell when someone's lying to him. He can tell when there's something actually wrong and they're trying to smooth it over or walk around it. And of course, as a kid, his parents divorced. And so he saw the full fallout of that. But as a 7-year-old, he didn't understand what he was seeing. So, yeah, when Donovan first comes to him, it's one of those cases where he looks at this man and goes, wow, this is the most amazing person I've ever seen. But it's still a matter of the trust issues trying to kick in and him going, no, there's no rational reason for it. He's not doing this to me. This is something that's coming back from the past. So it takes a lot of working around, but it's also kind of mixed in with the fact that John is aware he's a liability because, any touch against an electronic device and poof, it's dead. Which is a little hard to navigate in modern life, I'm having fun with that. I admit I'm evil. And
well, I love that. When I said that we all kind of came at this a little differently, that was one of the things I was thinking about because, that's really not an issue for Simon or for Eric in Treasure Trail, but I love how much thought John has to put into just going to someone's house for dinner so that he doesn't fry their entire media center.
Yeah, and it's a case too where I have to think about it, where I'm sitting there going, okay, visualize walking into somebody's house. What would be there? What would you have to avoid? And I had to do research on what kind of a car he could drive. Is there any kind of a watch he can wear? Yes, there's one. Mechanical watches are still good. How can he even do something simple like watching TV? Does he have access to the news? So he has to run a lot of things through Google Home, and we all know how well that works on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Yeah, our kids got us a Google Dot for Christmas, and they said, now you can just speak your search requests. And I'm thinking, oh, honey, you have no idea what kind of search requests I ask from Google. That thing is going to blow up and run out the door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does anybody else get themselves into trouble with search requests? Because I've had arson investigations, and I've had arson investigations. I've had situations where I've had to look up bombs and their impact against a building. So of course you're on YouTube watching things blow up and burn down, and I'm sure that looks good on a search history. So yeah. Okay, I'm glad I'm not.
I had silent poisons that kill people. Like how can I poison you and not have you, freaking out and whatever and drooling. So yeah, if anybody looked at our computers, like we'd all be in jail.
There's a near future post-apocalyptic series that my husband and I write, and it starts off with a nuclear assault, and so I'm sitting there running simulations on bombing major cities and how far does the fallout go, and I'm going, oh God, the helicopters are coming for me.
Yeah. I have one of my fans, and she's awesome. She is the NCIS equivalent of an Air Force special agent. So I will sometimes message her and go, is this okay? can I do this? Because I don't want to put this into Google search, but I can ask her.
Well, on that particular series, and this is where I love my writer friends, I put a question out to the hive mind because I knew I had a bunch of engineering friends out there. And one of them messaged me, and I did not realize that his day job was with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So he and I just spitballed all this stuff for like an hour. I was like, okay, then, does this count as official because I'm with him? Yeah, writer friends are awesome. One of our shared friends in the area is a physician. So he's the guy everybody calls to go, so if I wanted to stab somebody, but I don't really want him to bleed out, he just has to suffer for a while, make it hard to fight. Where should I stab him so he's still ouchy, but he doesn't die? And, oh, he just loves that.
And I wish I had him. I've got a book over here somewhere. It's called The Body Trauma, and that's what I reference. Because it tells you how you can hurt somebody, how bad it hurts, what kind of recovery time they need, you know, what kind of first aid they immediately need. And we refer to that book a lot. And sometimes we have to scale it back down because we're like, no, wait a minute, they need to have sex in the next 2 chapters, so we can't hurt them that bad.
Gotta hurt a little. That doesn't slow things down. Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah. Which sounds so mean, but logistics.
It all comes with plotting the book, right? You know, don't hurt him too bad for the sexy times. It counts. That's right.
Yeah.
So now I'm trying to think with everybody who also has medium ability, you know, talk to the ghosts as well. I know you do, Pandora. Okay. Are we all in that?
Yep.
Okay. I thought we were. So what kind of research have you done on psychic abilities, mediums, summoning the dead, you know, as one does?
In my case, I was doing some really random polls. Like I was watching ghost hunters and going through their website, which was kind of interesting. And then I was doing Googling of different sites where, you know, mediums suggest how a ghost pass on, or, you know, how to detect this is actually a ghost and not just somebody pulling a prank, or, you know, it's your plumbing that's acting up, that kind of thing. So that was really interesting to me. I discovered, though, the thing have to research the most is locations, places where actual ghost activity is taking place. And bless YouTube and bless college students, because they will walk in with a camera and put it up on YouTube, and you get to see the full building. Right. And that way you have an idea of exactly what they're doing and where they are. That's been so helpful.
How about you, Jordan?
Well, I really didn't need to do a ton of research on the psychic abilities, because I think that the magical part of my world building is whatever I say it is. So as long as I'm internally consistent and you know, I don't break my own rules, then I think that it's believable. So all I have to do is establish a point, and then going forward, that's how it is for the world building. But what I do research extensively is the cop aspect of Psy-Cop. So I have been to 3 citizens police academies, and, you know, I've gone to the firing range, and I've done a police ride along, and, you know, I feel like I absorb little details of how the cops interact with each other in a big city versus a small city. And I just absorb a lot of details that then make it into the book to support the main character's point of view, so that the realistic parts of him feel so realistic that when I say, oh, and then he calls them intersection repeaters. But when somebody dies in a car accident, their ghost kind of haunts the spot at certain times of the day. And so when he sees something that's out of the norm, he's established as being realistic enough that you then believe the magical stuff.
And I love that sometimes he's not really sure when he's seeing a ghost, when he isn't, if it's very real to him, and that kind of messes him up sometimes. And I thought that was a really fascinating aspect, because, again, I love seeing how other people deal with the same idea of psychics, and we all do them so differently. So that really fascinated me with that. How about you, Pandora?
I mentioned my psychic earlier. I don't only go to her for readings, but also for advice sometimes. I've also been in the audience with Thomas John, and he actually read me. And the interesting thing about that was that he would say things to other people like, I've got a B name here. Does anybody have someone with, a B name? And he looked right out into the crowd and said, I've got Marie. And I'm like, that's me. So it was very interesting to see how, a person with the mediumistic talents works it. And there are people who believe in this, there are people who don't, who think it's a fraud, but there's stuff that he pulled out of that reading that even if he read every single post on my Facebook page, he never would have known any of it. It's truly phenomenal how gifted some of these people are. And for location, I'm lucky enough to be in Massachusetts, and Salem's right in my backyard. So I've been able to bring in the Salem witch trials and the witches that were involved in it, the witches. And it's just been so great to be able to work, the place that I live into the lore of these stories.
Yeah, I've had a couple of readings with psychics, and I've followed a number of them, and I keep saying as far as I can tell, I don't have a psychic bone in my body, but I seem to attract people around me who do. So they've been a real resource to ask. And I generally, on the comp piece, I have folks in my beta readers who kind of keep me square on that. But one of my other author friends does a workshop on body disposal techniques. So basically how to get rid of the corpse, and she does it for writing conferences, how to get rid of the corpse after you've done the deed. And we've attended Coastal Magic a couple of times, drive down together. We're in the Carolinas, and it's just a matter of trust when you're driving through this long deserted stretch of the Georgia marshland, and in the middle of a conversation, your companion goes, "Now you could hide a body over there and nobody would find it." Proceeds to tell you why. It's like, I'm so glad we get along so well.
I had an author friend who was visiting me, and I had a new area rug, and we were both hanging out on the rug, and I go, "Oh, you're covered in carpet fiber," and she says, "Well, now you can't kill me."
Jokes authors make to each other.
We do have dark humor, I have to admit. But if you don't mind, I want to touch back on something Jordan said, because I think that's really the trick, is that if you are trying to write something paranormal, you don't really have to go based off of anybody else's system. Mm-hmm. You have to come up with your own, and you have to stick with it. Because if you break your own rules, that's when the reader's disbelief snaps, and that's when you lose people. I mean, I try to put as much realism into my books when it comes to location as possible, because then that feels real to them, and it draws the reader in. But there have been times where I just have to make up my own rules. Like with John's ability, I had to just kind of make up my own rule there, because I didn't see anything that was similar to what he could do. But if you can just make that system consistent and keep your rules, you're okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, what Pandora was saying about location as well, for me, that's often where I get a lot of my ideas, because if I know a book's going to be set in a certain place, I start looking up the local unsolved crimes, the local scandals, the haunted places, the ghost stories. And there's usually something in there that is either so well known or so obscure that your brain goes, I can use that. Even if you twist it and filter it, it's still a great place, to start for me, getting that inspiration.
I did that with two of my Max books, because the first one was in Arkansas and the second one was in Louisiana. And it's both places that I've been to, but I didn't really know the ghost lore in the area. So when I started looking up locations and ghost lore, I was getting all these different stories popping up. I'm like, I can use that. I can use that too. Yeah, we could just use all the things. Yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And sometimes fact is stranger than fiction. Often, actually, that's the case.
Now, this being paranormal romance, of course, our psychics all have a significant other. And I think in all of our cases, we've got people in established ongoing relationships as the series progresses. You know, in real life, sometimes you find yourself thinking, I just can't, you know, get him to understand. If we just had telepathy, it would all be fine, except apparently not. So let's talk about that, you know, relationship angle. Gee, this is supposed to be easier because one person has psychic ability. Then not the case. How about you, Pandora? Kick us off on this.
Well, with Tennyson and Ronan, Tennyson can definitely read him, which upsets Ronan to no end because it gives Tennyson the upper hand. But when I spun Jude off into his own series with his own psychic, I made it so Copeland couldn't read him, that he had some kind of a Navajo blessing on him that made it so that, you know, brain powers couldn't penetrate. And I liked that a lot better because it puts them always on even footing. And even if they argue or fight with each other, no one can one up the other because of, you know, a sixth sense or an additional power that they have.
Yeah, how about you, Jordan?
Well, I guess I'd say that Victor Bane's powers don't work that way. He considers himself to be the ultimate psychic one-trick pony. He can talk to dead people and that's all he can do. And it gives him absolutely no advantage socially or psychologically in any sort of situation dealing with a living person. So if anything, it just makes him more awkward because he's thinking, well, everyone's looking at me and everybody thinks I'm a freak. So, you know, his psychic abilities are not going to help him in his relationship. But his love interest, Jacob Marks, is super interested in him specifically because he is psychic. Jacob is a psychic groupie of sorts. And so I guess I've always liked the idea that there's somebody out there for everybody, and the right guy for Victor Bane was the one who not only tolerated the fact that he saw dead people, but who was kind of into it in a dirty way.
Yeah, and that Victor is so kind of broken at the beginning of the series. It's wonderful to see that relationship come about because he really needed somebody, and I was rooting for him.
He's a major underdog at the beginning, even though, you know, he's the most powerful guy in the room. He's just so shut down and avoidant, and you know, life has not been easy for him. So yeah, he's definitely not thinking that he's coming from a place of advantage.
Mm-hmm. How about you, AJ? Because your guys have some kind of balanced abilities there.
Yeah, I went into the series wanting to, I'm a sucker for this, okay? I'm a sucker for having some kind of a bond between two people, whether that's magically, psychically, what have you. So I kind of went into the original series with John wanting to have something there where they can psychically bond to another person. And I didn't want to hit the trope of, you know, because we're psychically bonded, the other person now knows what they're feeling or, you know, shares some of their ability. I didn't go there. But I wanted to have that kind of connection. But I also wanted to show true communication, because that's not often what we see in books these days with romantic partners, where they're good at communicating. They're trying to communicate with each other because they want it to be a good, stable relationship. And it seems to have worked in my favor because I've had a lot of people respond to me going, thank you for writing that. I'm like, you're welcome. This is kind of my pet peeve. But it was a nice carryover into Max, because when I started writing the spinoff series for it, it carried over the same way, where these two needed to be work partners if nothing else, but you still had that communication where they were trying to be good partners to each other. It was also nice in a way because Mac and John have the same issue, and that their abilities has put a wall between them and the world, and it's given them a lot of grief. So when they did meet the person that was going to be, you know, their lover, they had an issue accepting that because they had been rejected for so long by so many people. And it just didn't make sense to them that this amazing man would look at them and go, yes, I want you. Really? Why? That was their only response at first. What? Why? Are you injured in the head? Do I need to take you to the hospital? Why would you choose me? So it was nice to play off of that, but it was also kind of interesting because when I got to Mac's second book, I thought, no, wait a minute, I've already covered this ground. How do I cover it in a way that fits Mac? And it's not just a repeat of John's. That took a little doing, because I really had to understand the difference in personality to be able to pull it off well. And I hope I did.
Yeah, I had kind of the same thing with Simon and Vic in Badlands. Simon's a very powerful medium, and he also gets psychic visions, but he doesn't control those. They come, and he said, as he says, it would be nice if people just talked in complete sentences and I got to see the whole scene instead of just snippets, but that's not how it does, and I can't control when it happens. But his ex-fiancée didn't believe his powers were real. His mother didn't, believe they were real. So when he comes out, he's been out as a gay man for years, but he really has his coming out as a psychic when he moves to Myrtle Beach and says, damn it, this is who I am, and I'm not going to be ashamed of it anymore. And then he meets Vic, who got burned before believing this stuff, and he's trying to just be a just the facts man kind of cop. And so building that trust up, because Vic doesn't have any abilities, but he has to learn to trust what he can't see, but Simon does. Well, then in Treasure Trail, I wanted to do it differently, like you were saying, AJ, and Eric has some psychic ability to kind of read objects, but it's glitchy. But Ben, the former burned out Newark cop who's just given up on people, has always seen ghosts. So together they kind of have the whole spectrum, but it's with the volume turned down, at least so far, where they get bits and pieces, but at least they can believe that the supernatural thing is real. So we didn't have to go through the whole doubt thing like we did, because it's fun coming at it with different mixes of abilities as well as the trust piece.
It can be frustrating in series where somebody has a special ability when they're always doubted by the police chief or whoever, even after they've solved them like 15 murders, and they're still treating them like, oh, it's you, and oh, you think this, and yeah, haven't I proved this to you yet? It can be a little aggravating as a listener or a reader.
It's always like the Sherlock Holmes books, where he's got to say, well, I know this thing because you've got mud on your tie from this particular place, and there's a rock in your shoe, and half of your face is sunburned. It's like that. Like, they constantly have to prove, I know what I know, and this is why.
Yeah. So, curses. Let's talk about the dark piece here, because I think we've all touched on them somewhat. Pandora, they play a big role with some of Jude's things, especially.
Yeah, Jude is originally from Navajo Nation, and never really wanted a whole lot to do with his culture, because his father had been murdered by a skinwalker, and he wanted to just get as far away from the reservation as he could, so he took off on his 18th birthday. But yeah, that being cursed like that and having that on his head has played a huge role in who he is, and also the way that I've brought him along. I introduced him in book 5 of Cold Case, or book 6, I'm sorry, and he's just continued to evolve through this whole thing until we actually, spoiler alert, get to a point where he gets to resolve some of those issues by going back home.
How about AJ and Jordan? Curses or dark magic?
I've not done curses or dark magic underneath the AJ Sherwood pen name. I have underneath my Honor Rock Tour pen name. And I actually had a whole series based off of it where I had an artifactor, and she was a curse breaker. That was her specialty. So it's interesting what you can do to a character when it comes to curses. You see the Tumblr post where you can curse somebody in a silly way, where every time that someone says Thursday, they act like a dragon for 20 seconds. You can go lighthearted with it, but there are some pretty nasty curses out there that you can do, and sometimes they're really creative. So it's a matter of creativity, I guess, more than anything else. But it's again, that system of whatever you've come up with has to mesh with whatever magic system you put into place.
I think that it has everything to do with your world building, your series. So for my Psychop series, I don't think a curse would fit. It's almost pseudo-scientific the way that psychic abilities work in the Psychop series. However, I have a new series called The ABCs of Spellcraft, where it's more slapstick and lighthearted. And the premise is that people with a certain spellcrafting ability can cause things to come true by writing them down. And the whole first arc of that series is driven by a curse, but spoiler alert, they don't know that's what's behind all the issues. But yeah, curses can exist in that storyverse because it is all about magic. And I think, curses are sort of the flip side of magic, or the misuse of magic.
Yeah.
We run into curses a lot with my stuff, either haunted objects by a vengeful ghost that has unfinished business, or somebody who does intentionally lay a curse on someone else, and they either, the characters are either the ones getting cursed, or they need to figure it out to try to save somebody or to keep the curse from perpetuating. And it really, that's one of those things where the research definitely takes you down dark alleys and into some questionable places, because if you can think it up, somebody else has thought it up and probably has tried to do it for real somewhere with something.
Oh, sure.
And so looking that stuff up, it's really kind of amazing what you can find and what's out there. And I know the ancient Romans they would write things on either little clay tablets and put them down the well, or they would scratch them into the soft lead plate of something and toss it down the well. And they've brought those up and translated them, and they're things like, a pox on the baker because he shorted me with my bread, or I send scurvy to this person because the horse he sold me was no good. And it's just kind of amazing that that's 2,000 years ago, and people were, sort of like bad Yelp reviews, only involving the gods.
Yeah, people haven't really changed much, have they?
No, they haven't. And it's kind of funny because you run into this stuff and sometimes you find the resources for it. And one of my friends actually is pretty fluent in Latin, and in one of his books he wrote, I quote the Latin from some of these ancient Roman spells, but I have enough respect for history that I never read them out loud myself. So I thought that was interesting. Just, one of those writer perils, not accidentally cursing yourself as you're proofreading. Of course, that would cause problems for audiobook narrators, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If your narrator's suddenly a frog, you did it. So, what about this whole thing, this whole paranormal piece, haven't we touched on that you're dying to talk about? Because, wow, we have a lot of spooky stuff going on here. So what didn't I think to ask you guys?
I think that paranormal can be challenging to write because it's inherently a very visual medium. I'm thinking about shows like American Horror Story, where you have all these wonderful visuals, or there was something else I was watching, Stranger Things, where I hate it when they show the monster, and the monster kind of sucks because they don't have the budget to make a good monster. And in this season of Stranger Things, I'm like, oh no, that monster is really freaking scary, and they can put the camera right on it, and it is still just as scary as it was. But I think that in TV and film, you have not only the visual, but you also have music to amp up the mood and the scariness of a piece. So I think I just wanted to mention that I think sometimes that type of moodiness and that type of shock factor and pacing can be more challenging to do just with words alone.
Mm-hmm.
It is really challenging. And, one of the things that I do is I go into the school systems and I teach kids how to be an author. And sometimes I'm talking to fifth graders and sometimes I'm talking to college students. I never know. But one of the things I always try to emphasize with them is that if you are trying to set the scene, try to do it with as many senses engaged as possible. Make sure scent is in there, touch is in there, and not just what they're visually seeing and what they're hearing. And I'm like, and remember too that your character's reaction to the scene is a sense, because they're emotionally reacting and filtering through everything that they're experiencing. And if you can suck the reader into the character's mindset, then they're in the scene and half the battle is won at that point. But that's really hard to do, to put all of those sensory details into something when you're trying to keep the pacing of the action. And I don't know about you guys, but the words I hate and dread hearing from my editor, bar none, is it lacked tension. Because, God, that's hard to fix. It is not fun whatsoever. Doable, but not fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How about you, Pandora?
I started out in paranormal with Stephen King. And he, people always call him the master of horror, but it's the paranormal that starts it. Excuse me. And he kind of turned, like Christine, being able to, the car that was coming after people, or Charlie in Firestarter, who was able to burn people just by thinking about it. And he was able to seamlessly have horror, paranormal, and all of those other elements coming in together. It was perfect.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that always made Stephen King stuff so scary, and I think also really worked with the TV show Supernatural, is they were in normal places. They were in the big cities where a lot of the things are set. They're in, Stephen King. I mean, my God, Maine must be the most haunted state in the country because thanks to Stephen King, we know. But it's those small towns that everybody thinks are safer.
Right.
Except for that old ancient curse that's about to come due and kill everybody. Oopsie, I forgot to mention that. Yeah.
Yeah, and the clown that kills people eats kids every 27 years. Yeah. Other than that, utopia. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're fine.
That was much scarier in the book than on film.
Oh yeah. And that's the art of our craft, is being able to, to get people to be afraid of a voice in a drain. It was just a voice at first, right? I mean, what's scary about that? But there was just so much paranormal that he wrote, and people always just thought of it as horror. But, the curses in Pet Sematary, and, like Jordan mentioned the Dead Zone earlier. I mean, that being psychic ripped that man's life apart. So, it's always been, that's where my paranormal roots come from, is reading those books.
The last time I was in New Orleans, I was walking down one of the streets, and there's nothing else weird going on except there's a red balloon tied to the sidewalk right.
Jeez, that would have been it for me.
That was it. Across the street. I'm out of here.
I read that book for the first time in 1987. Okay, I'm still terrified of that book.
I slept with the lights on.
Yes, absolutely.
And Gordon, you've got a fur baby behind you, I see.
He is always interested when I'm on Zoom.
With Zoom, we've now met, so many fur babies. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I was actually surprised mine's not jumped in my lap. But Gail, you mentioned things that we haven't talked about. And one of the fun things that we get to do is we get to put other cultures into our books,
Mhm.
which is really amazing.
Yeah.
I've had 2 different people contact me going, are you ever going to put in such and such? And I'm like, what's that? All ears, details, all details. I didn't realize that a Mexican culture has basically their version of a shaman.
Mhm.
And I can't pronounce it for the life of me because I don't roll R's. But it was so cool to read it, and they literally will use runes and rituals, and they will invoke the natural energy of a body in order to promote healing. And I'm like, dude, where was this? I could have used that 3 books ago. Yeah, that's very cool. I've got another friend of mine who's from Brazil, and I'll sometimes tap her and go, Thais, what do you know? And she just unloads all of this different information on me. Before I talked to her, I didn't realize that Brazil has 5 different major cultures that are all blended in, because they have all the slave people that came in that influenced and left voodoo behind. They have Chinese myths because of all the Chinamen that came over, and they've got their own native culture that was still surviving. And of course, they were a colony of Portugal forever, so they've got different Portuguese culture in it. And I'm sitting there listening to her going, do I need to take notes? I feel like I'm in a lecture of some sort. I need to take notes. But that's really fun, because we do have international readers. And they get so excited when they see something that's not just based off of Western culture, where they're like, I recognize this. I know this. So yeah, I find it very cool. And it's a perfect excuse to go buy more books.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm always game for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, mine draw heavily on voodoo, voodoo, and hoodoo. Being in the Deep South and the Low Country, that's just how you roll. And I had a lot of fun doing one where it brought in Caribbean magic and curses and some ghosts. Like there's a Caribbean ghost of a rolling cow with a big bell that it's 3-legged cow, and it rolls and it knocks you into the water and drowns you, kind of like an alligator, only it's a cow. Except when they tell the story, it's really scary. You think that sounds silly, but then when you're being chased by a rolling cow that's going to try to drown you, it's scary. So yeah, that's a terrific way to bring some new stuff in, and have somebody throw you some curveballs. I know you, Pandora, you've dealt with a lot of the Navajo myths, particularly in some of the more recent ones.
It was very interesting to research it, sitting here at my computer, but it was another thing entirely to get to go out there last year. We were in Monument Valley and, big parts of Navajo Nation for almost a week. And it's a spectacular place. You can feel the energy there, the energy of those people. It's amazing.
Any cultures you can think of, Jordan, that have kind of played into some of your stuff, or that you're just intrigued with? And
well, one of the characters, the love interest in my Spellcraft series, is a Russian immigrant. And so I sort of made that decision off the cuff because I thought like a big, bald, tattooed Russian guy would be threatening and scary. But then it turned out that having him be a Russian immigrant played a huge part in shaping his whole character, his whole reason for being in the United States, his total MO generally is like, I don't want to get deported and I don't want to go back. And then it turned out that a good friend of mine who's a beta reader of mine married a Russian guy to give him a green card and had been to Moscow a couple of times. So it turned out that I had a great resource for doing some research.
that is always such an exciting thing. Well, folks, we're at the end of the hour. I think we could spend, all evening sitting here just knocking this stuff back and forth. And there will be other panels, but we need to wrap things up now. But let's go around, and I'd love to have everybody remind readers what your series are and where they can find you. So Pandora, why don't you kick us off with that?
I have the Cold Case Psychic series, which of course morphed into the Cold Case Psychic spin-off series with the side characters, and then Haunted Souls. They're all available on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. And the most recent book that came out was Ghost Writer, which features a haunted typewriter.
Oh, fun.
AJ? Oh, or go ahead, Jordan.
I was going to say my face is showing, so I might as well talk. You can find out more about my psychic series, PsyCop, at psycop.com. And my other series, the ABCs of Spellcraft, you can find out more about that at jcpbooks.com. And if you like audio, the audios of both of those are really good. I couldn't be happier with my narrators. So if you like audio, please go listen to the sample and see if you like it.
Awesome. AJ?
So my John's Mystery Series and Mac's Marvelous Manifestations, they are both on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. The first John's book, John's Downright Ridiculous Shooting Case, is on Audible. And the second book is being recorded right now as we speak. So I'm hoping to have that out August. And then the first John's book actually releases in Germany next month. So for any German listeners, that's going to happen. I'm very excited about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm blown away that's going to finally happen, because we've been trying to get everything translated since GRL last year. Yeah, it's been a little bit of a process. And then I have two series that are not paranormal per se. I've got my Unholy Trifecta series, which I finish next month, and Fourth Point of Contact, which is high fantasy, but still fun.
Awesome. Well, my Badlands series, Witchbane series, Kings of the Mountain, Treasure Trail are all on Amazon. They're not in KU, but they are on Kindle, Kobo, Nook, and a lot of them are on audio. Everything else is coming to audio, but it's a slow process. So they'll be on audio eventually, but they are out there on ebook and Amazon. Where can we find you guys on social media? Jordan?
Oh, I'm on primarily on Facebook. So look up Jordan Castillo Price, Castillo is the middle name.
Okay. AJ?
Primarily on Facebook as well, AJ Sherwood, and then you can join me in my group, which is AJ's Gentleman. I do have Instagram. I'm a very bad author and I'm not on it very often, but I'm more reliably on Facebook, yes.
How about you, Pandora?
I'm primarily on Facebook as well under my name, Pandora Pine. And also my reader group is Pandora's Box 11. Who knew there were so many Pandora's boxes on Facebook? But there are.
I'm on Facebook as Gail Z. Martin. The Z is important because there's another Gail Martin who's an author, but she writes inspirational fiction, and I write about vampires, so you don't want to get us confused. And then Morgan Brice, I have a Worlds of Morgan Brice group. My Gail and Larry group is the Shadow Alliance, and on pretty much everything else, Instagram, Twitter, and all that, if you go for Gail Z. Martin, GZ Martin, or Morgan Brice, you'll find me somewhere. So, well, folks, thank you so much for being here. This has been a lot of fun, and I can just see lots of other conversations coming out of this. And everybody listening, this has been part of the Romance Track for ConTinual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and we will be back with a lot more great stuff. So stay tuned and keep an eye out for more to come. Thanks so much.